Okay, so let's begin the assembly steps. So first we're going to take the pipe clamp and the carriage, and we're going to put those together with the two large cap screws. So they're going to go through these holes like this. Okay, and then we're going to screw them right into those two holes right there, just like that. Okay, this is what you should have when that's all done. So it should have a nice smooth fit. Make sure you got it lined up properly, and it should be a nice solid system. Okay. Next, we're going to put the let's put the nut in there. So here's the lead nut, and that's going to go right in here on the top side. It's going to drop in. We're going to line up those holes, and we're going to use the four flathead screws that came with the kit. And we're going to use those to hold it in place, and they're going to drop into each of the four corners. And that should look like this when it's finished. And remember, when you're assembling anything, you want to put it together loose first. So gently get all the screws in, snug everything up before you tighten anything down so that you don't have anything misaligned. But that should drop in there nice and smooth, should sit flush on the edge. And next we'll put in the linear bearings. These are going to go here. It doesn't matter which direction they go in, but we'll put them in right here through the top, one on each side. Okay, and we're going to push them. There's a line right here. We're going to push it so this line is just about flush with the top of the carriage assembly. We can adjust that later, but right now that's what I'm going to shoot for. So the entire groove I'm going to have visible, okay, above the carriage. And like I said, we can fine tune that in a minute. And then these are held in place with the two cap screws. Let's see, where are they? Right here. So you're going to put one right here and tighten that. And one on the other side. And tighten that. Okay, and then while we're doing it, let's go ahead and put the screw in that holds the pipe clamp together. So that will be the next, the longer and the single cap screw right here. There's only one this size. And you'll see the hole is threaded or tapped on one side, and it's got a clearance hole on the other. So you want to come in through this side, just drop that in, and we'll snug that up a little bit. Okay, don't strip the screws. You're screwing into aluminum, so make sure everything looks good. Okay, and again, we're just going to snug it up so that these bearings are locked into place. You don't have to go crazy. It's actually not terrible if they can slide just a little bit under some force. In case you do something wrong and you slam your periscope down, they can actually sort of act as a shock absorption or a cushion when they hit the bottom. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so you got this in here. That's going to tighten your pipe. When the pipe goes in, for the people that have the full lifter system, the pipe's going to fit in here like this, and then you'll just tighten this down, and that'll lock the pipe into place. And that's really nice because when you go to adjust your periscope angle, if the whole periscope needs to be tweaked a little bit, you can just loosen that screw and just twist the pipe until you get to the angle that you want to have, and then tighten that down. And you can do that right in place inside the dome. So that's what we're looking at here, but we don't need the pipe for now. So I'm going to loosen that a little bit, and we'll get rid of the pipe. But this is what you should have right now. So the bearings are snug, they're not moving. Okay, you've got your nut in there, and it's all a nice secure housing. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll take the lead screw, and the lead screw is going to go in here, and it's going to screw in from the top or bottom, but you want the point of the lead screw, this end right here, to be on the bottom side of the system, and we'll just kind of put that right in the middle, about like that. Okay, on the top of the lead screw is this little guy. That allows this screw to be hollow so that it's lightweight, and this is going to press into here, and that might be a snug fit, but that's okay. So take your time working that in. You could even open that hole up just slightly if you needed to with a file to get that to go in, or you could put the lead screw in some hot water to get that to go in, or just press it. But we're going to snug that in for a second. Okay, so what worked for me is I just took a little file and put it in here on the side, and I didn't actually file this. I really kind of just used the sharp edge of the file just to kind of deburr that edge of the inside of that screw. Okay, and don't damage the outside of the screw, obviously, but once you clear that out a little bit, blow it out so you're not trapping any plastic debris in there, and then this will fit in pretty good. So Let's see if we can get that in there. And this doesn't have to, this is a tight fit. It doesn't have to be a tight fit. It can be slightly loose, but it's not a problem if it's tight either. But anytime you're putting two parts together, it's always dangerous because you never want to get it so tight that you start to put it in and then you can't get it all the way in and you can't get it back out. So make sure you open that hole up nice before you put it in there. So that's now installed on the end of the screw. It should look like that. Okay, then on the other end of the screw, we're going to put the pulley. But before we do that, just want you to make sure you have a good fit between the screw and the nut. It should be loose, okay? It's okay that it's sloppy. This is only driving the system up and down. It's the bearings that are going to keep your system rigid. So you want some play in here so you don't have binding. But you should be able to hold your lead screw up, okay, and that should be able to just twist down like that. Now, you probably should have tested that before I put the whole this pipe clamp on here because it's not balanced well. But if you tip it, you know, if you put the pipe clamp on top and you give it a little spin, that ought to spin down there pretty nice without binding. Okay, if you get some binding, then we need to, you need to find where the pinch point is. I don't think you're going to have that problem, but if you do, you need to find out where it's tight, and you may want to go with the file and just kiss that plastic just a hair and loosen that up. But you shouldn't have that problem. I designed these to be loose so that shouldn't be. And if you give it a little spin, you'll see there's plenty of play in there, and that should just spin nice and easy. Okay. Something else you can do is kind of pull on the carriage while you're moving the screw, and if it ever has a binding spot, that will polish that up nice. Now you don't need any kind of lubrication on this, but if you have something that you just love, a dry graphite or something wet, you're welcome to play with that. But I prefer not to put anything in there because I hate stuff that gums up or gets dust in it over time. Okay, but here's what you should have now. Okay, so from here we're going to take the pulley with the large hole, and that's going to go on the end head. So that takes the little black set screw right here, and that just goes right in the hole. So we'll get one started and get the other one started. Okay, so you're going to slide that on, and it's important to slide that on far enough so that you have a lip. You'll see that little lip that's sticking out right here. That needs to just protrude past the pulley. So you see that little bump right there? You want to make sure that that's there because that's going to ride on the bearing, and you don't want the pulley surface riding on the bearing. So make sure you can see that. It's pretty much snug all the way up here, but it doesn't have to be snug here, but it's important that there's at least a few thousandths of an inch spacing here so that when the pulley, when it's assembled, that the inner race of the pulley is riding on that lip and not up on the metal surface. When you get the pulley where you want it, and let's see if we can keep this thing focusing. You want to snug the screws, but don't go crazy, right? You're tightening into plastic, so you want to get it to bite, but you don't want to deform the plastic. You can definitely destroy this part if you over tighten. So I would recommend using your Allen wrench, with the low torque position like this, and don't put it in this way where you're going to over torque it. Okay, but you want to get that in nice and tight. Okay, so that's not moving. All right. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that the lead screw fits nicely over the bearing. So you want to use one of your 6mm bearings and test fit it. This is a little snug on this one. They may vary a little bit. Again, it doesn't take much change in the size for it to give you some fits. I think I could probably press fit this one on just if I push really hard with my thumb. But like I was saying before, sometimes that's a dangerous game. And so I'm going to file just a little bit off of this to make sure that it's going to go on nicely. I don't have to take a lot off, but if I just take a little flat file, I set it right down on that lip, make sure I keep it flat against there, and I just gently go around a couple times. I can remove some of that material. Again, just very lightly. You're only taking off, maybe 1/1000th of an inch all the way around. And again, this could also be press fit in. You could heat this rod up, with hot water, 140, 150 degrees, and that may be all it takes for that to go in nice. But I'll let you use your best judgment on how tight you want that to go. But it doesn't have to be super tight, but I don't want it to have a lot of slop. But then we'll put the bearing on, and we'll press that bearing in so that it fits snug. Okay, and so the bearing's installed, and you'll see that the bearing is touching the plastic of the screw. It's sitting on that shelf. It's not touching the aluminum pulley, so that you have that gap, and that should spin nice and smoothly. Okay, and that's what that should look like before we go to the next step. Okay, the next step is going to be to assemble the whole system. So we're going to start with the bottom plate, and we've got our top plate, and we're going to put the screw assembly in this location. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we take the timing belt and we put it over the screw so that that's not left out. And then we'll take our 4 rods and we'll put those in place. So the 2 larger rods, they're longer and a bigger diameter. These are 6mm rods. These are going to go right through the right through the linear bearings and then down into the bottom plate. And the smaller ones will go out here for stability. The 5mm rods will go out here. So we have to take the screws out. If you remember, the screws are already installed on the end, so unscrew those, and then we'll put the system together. Okay, so as you're installing this, you always want to test fit everything. So you'll want to make sure that your rod will fit nicely, right, in the hole that it's going to be inserted into. So make sure that it fits in there, bottoms out all the way, so that you're not finding that out during assembly. Now, these will be a nice fit, but you don't want it to be too tight because it may not pull together during assembly, and then it's going to be a mess to try to separate it. So make sure you're comfortable with the fit before you put everything together, and you can recognize it's going to go in without a lot of twisting, because once you start assembling it, you're not going to be able to wiggle or turn one part because they'll all be rigid. So it should go in pretty nicely. Now, these are stainless steel rods, so if they're too tight, you're going to need to get a file and take off some material, put it in a drill, and maybe sand it down a little bit. But I tried to make sure these holes had a good fit. In fact, this is one of the delays in the run that we talked about. I had to open up the holes on one of the parts because I didn't think it'd be easy for you guys to sand these down. But if you do, for some reason, have to take some material off of these rods, be careful not to take more than you need. As far as, you know, when it's inserted in here, you're only going to have about 6mm of material that goes into the hole. So don't file all the way up here, because on some of the rods, the bearing will actually ride all the way up to the end, and you don't want to have your bearing riding on a surface that you've damaged or roughened up through sanding. So if you do sand it down, only sand the part that's going inside, but hopefully you won't have that problem. Okay, so test fit everything first, and then we'll put this together. Okay, so I prefer to put everything in the bottom first. You know, make sure you got all your screws in the bottom nice, and that you've got your carriage assembly installed and your belts in the right place. And now we'll put the top bracket on, and then we'll snug up the screws. I should point out, before you put that top bracket on, we need to make sure we get the pulley, the second 6mm pulley, and that's going to go right here in the hole at the top. Okay, so you can, make sure that that fits in there nice. And also you want to do a test fit to make sure that the pulley fits nicely on the little bearing insert piece that we had pushed into the lead screw. So I'm going to do a test fit on that right now. Okay, so here I'm test fitting the bearing. Gosh, the focus is terrible. I'm test fitting the bearing on this the insert bracket, and this is also a little tight, so I'm going to file down a little bit of material on here to make sure that we get a good fit right off this surface. And again, if you'll notice, this is very similar to the other end. It's got a lip right here that rides on the bearing. Do not file that lip. So I'm going to remove some material, and obviously this would have been nice to do. In fact, here I'm going to just take this rod out. I'm going to pop this off for a minute so I can play with it. And you should be able to actually disassemble this whole thing even with this bracket, and let's see if it really works. It does. Good. So I'm going to take this out for a minute while I play with this. And sorry, this is what I get for trying to do a instructional video in real time. And I'm going to just gently remove a little bit of material all the way around, so I'm spinning it as I file. Okay, and once you get that filed down nice, then this will press fit onto here. And again, you should have that lip still intact that the bearing actually rides on, nice and flush on top. And you can just actually leave the bearing and all this installed and still put the whole system back together. So at this point, you can come in here and just thread this back through. Okay, and then we'll put the belt back on, put the rods back in place. Okay, and then we'll just put it all back together here. Okay, make sure the bottom bearing is still installed and sits down in there nicely. Okay, and that's what we ought to have. Now we're ready to put the top bracket on. Oh, gosh, this thing is just not focusing well. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's our system, and then we will just gently fit everything together. Make sure that it all fits in here nicely. Okay, so when you're all done, this is what it should look like. So your screws are all nice and snug. Remember not to mix up your screws. The screws that are in the smaller 5mm rod may possibly be a smaller diameter than the ones that are in the larger rod. Like I said before, one is a 4/48, the other one's a 3/48. So that the pitch is the same on both, but the diameter is different. And so I actually went through and we tested every rod, and if any of them felt like the threads were not grabbing enough, then we increased it from the 3/48 to the 4/48. So that's why the screws were pre-installed. So try to keep each screw with the rod when you get it. Now when you're putting it together, if you have a little bit of friction trying to get these in and you've already started assembling them, you'll notice that when you tighten the screw, I mean, you'll know when you've got it all the way in, because it'll just be pretty smooth, and then it'll come to a nice hard stop. If it feels like as you're tightening it, it's still pulling, then that means your rod is binding. It's not all the way in, so you can keep tightening it in, or back it out and just tighten it in again. But when you do get it all the way in, you'll know you'll get a nice hard stop. Okay, so when it's all together, everything should fit nice. There'll be a little bit of slop vertically if you pull hard, where the bearing has some freedom to move. If you want to get exotic, we could put a shim in there. I was going to include shims in the kit, but the truth is, it doesn't matter. There's no pressure on your lifter that's pulling up on it. So with the gravity and the weight of the Periscope, it's always going to be pushing down, and the side-to-side wobble is taken care of with the tolerance between the shaft and the linear bearings. And so if you wobble it, you'll notice it's very tight this way. And when the belt's on here and holding it, this way, you won't get a lot of slop up and down. But even if you do, that slop, that really isn't going to be a problem. Okay, so when this is all assembled, if the belt's not binding on anything, then you should be able to move this up and down freely. Okay, and it should move all the way down, all the way up. Okay, again, if you're having some binding issues, then we need to figure out what's going on there. You want your let's get the belt out of the way here. So the pulley should be able to go all the way down to the bottom and pretty much touch. And you can see in this assembly, one of the pulleys is touching before the other one. And so I'll loosen that up and get them to both hit at the exact same time. It's not super critical, but it spreads that load around. And then same thing when it goes all the way up, right? The bearings will hit up there, and you want your bearings to hit before the plastic nut hits. And so that's how you know you have a good spot. Okay, but you should have some reasonable freedom of travel. It's probably not going to just fall on its own, but if you give it a push, you can get an inch or two of free play out of it. Okay, so now you know you have a system that's moving with very little friction. And if you take your thumb down here and you rotate just the bottom, you'll see that should turn really easy. So it doesn't take a lot of force on the motor to raise this up and down, right? But also when you're holding your thumb on here, it'll actually lock itself into place pretty good. So now you should have a system that looks like that, and we'll start putting some of the more elaborate parts on here.